AITA for refusing to pay my sister's bill and giving her information to the restaurant after she ditched me. Last night was supposed to be one of those rare, wonderful evenings you look forward to for ages. My sister, who recently moved to a town nearby with her boyfriend, had reached out last week to invite me and my husband to dinner. The idea of getting together was a big deal for me. We hadn't lived close to each other in years, so I was thrilled. There's this particular restaurant in town, a bit on the upscale side, and it's one of our favorite spots for date nights, partly because it's pricey enough that we can only justify going maybe once or twice a year. A dinner for two there runs about $200 to $150. But it's worth it. The ambience, the service, the food, it's the kind of place where everything feels a bit more special. I casually mentioned this to my sister, suggesting that she check out the menu beforehand, knowing it might not be for everyone's budget, and there are so many great restaurants in the area that aren't as expensive. I even offered to explore other options, but she quickly reassured me they were set on going. Her tone was insistent, so I thought, why not? We hadn't been to this place in a while, and I was secretly thrilled for a little splurge. Fast forward to last night, and I could hardly contain my excitement. My husband and I were in our room getting ready, savoring the novelty of an upscale evening out with my sister and her boyfriend. I picked out a dress I save for occasions like this, something a little fancy but still comfortable enough for a long evening of eating, drinking, and laughing. My husband, equally excited, wore a jacket I hadn't seen him in since our last big anniversary dinner. We even paused to take a few selfies together before heading out the door, both of us glowing in that way you do when you're ready to indulge in a night you've looked forward to for ages. Everything felt right, and I couldn't wait to see my sister again in this beautiful setting, and just unwind with the four of us, away from all the day-to-day stress. When we arrived at the restaurant, the atmosphere was everything I remembered it to be, maybe even better. The warm lighting, soft jazz music, and gentle hum of conversations around us made the place feel alive in such a cozy, welcoming way. There was a special energy in the air, a combination of elegance and excitement. Our table was already set up, tucked into a perfect spot by the window, with a great view of the downtown lights. The lighting was just dim enough to make everything look a little softer, warmer, more intimate. My sister and her boyfriend were already seated when we walked in, and she looked as thrilled as I felt, dressed up a bit more than usual, with her eyes sparkling as she waved us over. The whole scene was perfect. Once we were all settled in, we dove into the menu, exchanging suggestions and sharing little oohs and ahs over what we might try. The waiter brought out fresh bread and some sort of fancy olive oil, and we ordered appetizers and cocktails to get the evening rolling. We all leaned into the experience, savoring every bite of food that arrived. I ordered a specialty cocktail I hadn't tried before, something with gin, fresh herbs, and citrus, and it was everything I'd hoped it would be, crisp and refreshing. The appetizers were beautiful too, almost like pieces of art. We shared everything around the table, passing little plates back and forth, each bite sparking new comments about how fantastic the flavors were, and how we definitely have to try and recreate this or that dish at home. Meanwhile, my sister and I fell into that easy rhythm of conversation that always makes me feel like no time has passed, no matter how long we've been apart. We laughed about old family stories, shared little updates about our lives, and reminisced about growing up. I felt so connected to her in that moment, so grateful that we'd get to do this more often now that she lived nearby. Even our husbands seemed to be getting along well, chatting about work and sharing jokes over their beers. It felt rare and beautiful to have everyone enjoying themselves in the same space, each of us perfectly in sync. As the meal wrapped up, my sister glanced at her phone, then excused herself to go to the bathroom. I thought absolutely nothing of it, figuring she'd be back in a minute. She's the type who takes her time, so it didn't seem strange at all. A few minutes later, her boyfriend followed suit, saying he'd go check on her. That didn't feel strange either. They're one of those couples that sticks together like glue, so I assumed he was just being thoughtful. My husband and I kept chatting, still high on the ambience and the good food, oblivious to any red flags. But then, as the minutes started stretching longer, we started to exchange glances. We're not talking a quick bathroom break here. It was a good 15 minutes or more, and neither of them had come back. I checked my phone, wondering if I'd missed a message, but there was nothing. Finally, I decided to send my sister a quick text. Everything okay in there? I hit send and waited, watching my phone screen as if she might reply instantly. Nothing. I was trying not to overthink it, telling myself maybe she just needed a moment of privacy or was caught up fixing her hair or something like that. But when my husband leaned in and said, "Maybe you should go check," I felt a small pang of worrying rise in my chest. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and made my way over to the restroom area, walking slowly and trying to look casual. When I peeked into the bathroom, there was no sign of her. I even stepped inside, scanning the row of stalls, but it was empty. I turned around, starting to feel that tightness of unease spreading through me. I checked the entrance area, looked around the nearby hallway, and then, finally, headed back to the table, my mind racing with confusion. By the time I got back, the server was standing at our table, holding the check in hand and smiling as he placed it down in front of us with a polite "Thank you for dining with us tonight." And that was the moment my heart dropped right into my stomach. I pulled out my phone, fingers shaking a little as I typed a quick message to my sister. "Hey, are you coming back? The check's here." I tried to keep it light, though my gut was already in knots. As soon as I hit send, I stared at the screen, waiting for those little typing dots to pop up, praying for some quick, simple explanation. When I saw them appear, I felt this brief flicker of relief, like maybe this was all just a misunderstanding. But the relief faded the moment her reply appeared on my screen. "We already left. Thanks for dinner." It was just as amazing as you said it would be. I sat there, frozen, staring at her message, rereading it as if maybe I'd somehow read it wrong the first time. "We already left. Left." And then, "Thanks for dinner." It hit me like a slap. She was saying they'd actually left, gone without a word, without even attempting to cover their part of the meal. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, they'd actually ditched us with a bill they knew was huge. I felt this intense wave of confusion and anger swirling in my stomach, my mind racing to keep up. I took a deep breath, fingers flying, as I typed out another text. "Wait, what? Are you saying you ditched us?" I pressed send, feeling my pulse quicken as I waited for her to explain, to say this was some kind of joke or mistake. But nothing. The typing indicator appeared again, and then disappeared. I waited, watching the screen in tense silence as seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. But there was no response, just silence, the sounds of the bustling restaurant around me, and this growing sense of betrayal settling in my chest as I realized what she'd done. I fired off another message, this one sharper, more direct, demanding an explanation. "Are you serious right now?" I texted, practically stabbing the send button in frustration. Still nothing. I sent another, then another, each one a little more heated, each word reflecting my disbelief that she'd do this. But my screen stayed blank. She wasn't answering. No dots, no response, just the awful, sinking realization that she and her boyfriend had actually left us with the check. And not just any check, this was a $450 meal, the kind of bill that required planning, budgeting, and a sense of responsibility. This wasn't some little diner where picking up an extra meal might go unnoticed. This was an upscale restaurant where every dollar spent was intentional. By this point, my heart was racing, my thoughts spiraling as I sat there, incredulous, with my husband staring at me in stunned silence. He didn't say anything, but his eyes held the same shock, the same sense of betrayal that I felt, and I could tell he was as floored as I was. They'd invited us, chosen the restaurant, enjoyed a beautiful evening, and now just left. My stomach churned with anger. I sent one final text, my hands almost trembling as I typed it. "I'm giving you 30 minutes to come back and pay your portion, or I'm giving the restaurant your information. They may involve the police." This time, I wasn't asking or giving her the benefit of the doubt. I was serious. I wasn't going to let them walk away from this like it was nothing, leaving us to cover a bill they knew full well they had no right to dump on us. 30 minutes passed. I watched the minutes tick by on my phone, each one making it clearer and clearer that she wasn't coming back. She'd left us here to pay for the whole thing without a second thought. After the 30 minutes, I took a deep breath, feeling a kind of cold anger take over. I'd given her every chance to make it right, to come back and settle her part of the bill. But she'd chosen silence. She was really going to let this happen. I stood up and found the manager, explained the situation as calmly as I could, and gave him her full name, her number, all the information I could. The manager's polite demeanor didn't hide the look of annoyance and disappointment on his face. He was professional, but it was clear he'd seen enough of these kinds of situations to know how frustrating they could be. He assured me they'd follow up with her, and I paid for our portion, leaving the restaurant feeling a mix of anger, betrayal, and absolute disbelief. My husband and I walked out into the cool night air, both of us stunned, our perfect evening shattered. We didn't say much to each other. There weren't really words for what had happened. We were both too floored to speak. The next morning, my sister finally called me back. As soon as I answered, I could hear the irritation in her voice, like she was the one who'd been wronged here. "Why is the restaurant calling me? They keep saying I need to come back and pay or they'll involve the police." Her tone was full of exasperation, like this was some bizarre inconvenience rather than the natural consequence of her skipping out on a $450 bill. I sat there for a second, stunned that she had the audacity to sound annoyed, and finally took a deep breath, trying to keep my own anger in check. "Well, maybe because you skipped out on your bill," I replied, not bothering to hide the sharpness in my voice. It was baffling that she could even be questioning this. She huffed, as if that was somehow an unreasonable response, and then launched into an explanation I could barely believe. She said she'd just assumed that I'd be covering the tab since I've picked up the bill in the past when it was just the two of us out for dinner. I was floored. Sure, I'd paid for the occasional $30 or $60 meal when it was just her and me, grabbing a casual bite to eat, but this was a high-end restaurant with a bill that was almost 8 times that. The sense of entitlement in her assumption was staggering. I quickly pointed out the obvious difference between treating her to a casual dinner for tea and picking up the tab for a 4-person meal at an upscale spot we had specifically chosen because she wanted a special night out. My voice was shaking a little as I reminded her that I'd even offered to pick a more affordable place, but she'd insisted on going here. She didn't have a response for that, just a weak well, I just thought. Then, without any hint of embarrassment or shame, she admitted something that felt like a slap across the face. She admitted that when I asked the waiter for separate checks, she realized I wasn't planning to cover the whole bill, and that's when she decided to leave, fully intending to stick us with her portion. She actually planned to dine and dash on her own sister without a second thought, without a hint of guilt. I was stunned, sitting there with my mouth half open, struggling to comprehend how she could see this as acceptable behavior. I asked her point blank, "Are you seriously saying that the second you realized I wasn't paying, you just ditched us?" Her response, "Well, yeah, I didn't think it'd be that big of a deal. That was it." No remorse, no sense of wrongdoing, just a casual shrugging off of the fact that she'd pulled something so disrespectful. I told her flat out that if she wanted to put this behind her, all she had to do was go back to the restaurant, pay her part of the bill, and be done with it. The restaurant was waiting for her to settle up, not me, and all she had to do was face them and handle her own responsibility. But, of course, she had another excuse ready. She whined that it would be too embarrassing to walk in there and pay her bill now, that she couldn't stand the thought of facing the restaurant staff after they'd called her so many times. Instead, she asked me to go back and pay her portion on her behalf, as if I hadn't made my stance clear enough already. I couldn't believe the audacity of it all. She actually wanted me to clean up her mess, to step in and cover for her, to spare her the embarrassment of facing the consequences of her own choices. I calmly told her no. I explained that this was her responsibility, not mine. She had made her bed by deciding to leave us with her portion of the check, and now she had to lie in it. She went on to tell me about how tough things were for her financially, how much stress this could cause if the restaurant actually went through with involving the police. And sure, I could understand that times are hard, but she knew that going into the night. She'd been given every chance to choose a more affordable restaurant, and she'd ignored every one of them. She chose this place, enjoyed the meal, and then decided it was okay to skip out on her bill and dump it on me. I couldn't bring myself to feel bad for her, not after what she'd done. The whole conversation left me shaken. This wasn't some misunderstanding or momentary lapse in judgment. She had actually planned this, had calculated that I'd just pick up the bill like it was no big deal, and when I didn't, she chose to abandon us to face the consequences of her actions. AITA for providing information to the restaurant about the sister. Update 1. I've only been answering a few questions so far, and it's been less than an hour since I posted, but it's already so clear that I'm not the one in the wrong here. It's not the money that's bothering me the most, it's this deep-seated feeling that my sister views me as some kind of piggy bank rather than her sibling. That thought has been gnawing at me, and it's probably the most hurtful part of all of this. We're both in our early to mid-30s, and honestly, she's never been outright awful before. It's not like I could have predicted this level of entitlement or outright betrayal from her, and it hurts more because, up until this point, she hadn't done anything so blatantly disrespectful. But looking back, I realize there's been this subtle pattern in the way she interacts with me, specifically regarding my income. She's always found these little ways to slip my salary into conversations, sometimes just hinting at it, other times being completely blatant. It's almost like she sees my income as her business, as if it's this endless well she can dip into whenever she wants. I remember one time, back when I first met her boyfriend. We were talking about cars since he'd just bought a brand new one, something nice, a big deal. He seemed excited, and I could tell it was one of those big life purchases he was really proud of. As we were talking, I casually mentioned I'd love to get into a new car too, but that I just wasn't sure if it was the right financial move at that moment. I said something about saving up a bit more before I could make a commitment like that. My sister didn't miss a beat before chiming in front of her boyfriend, mind you, and saying something like, "Oh, come on, you make XXX, you can definitely afford that car." It wasn't just her words that stung, it was her tone, like she was implying I was being ridiculous by being cautious with my own money. It was such an awkward moment. Here I was, just trying to make a friendly comment about cars, and she had to turn it into this uncomfortable discussion about my income. I felt completely exposed, like my personal finances were laid out in front of someone I barely knew, all because she couldn't resist turning it into a "you can afford it" moment. Her words hit harder because it wasn't just about the car, it felt like she was sending me a message. Almost like she was saying, if you can afford to spend on things like this, why can't you spend on me? And the thing is, I didn't even know her boyfriend that well at the time, so for her to bring up my salary in front of him just felt inappropriate, invasive, and almost like a power play. She knew I wouldn't call her out in front of him, so I just kind of laughed it off, though it left me feeling unsettled. That was one of the first times I really started to feel like she viewed me through the lens of my salary rather than as her sister. It's like she's got this ongoing tally in her head of what I make, what I can spend, and where I'm allowed to budget. And honestly, it's so uncomfortable. I've tried to be subtle in handling it, to shrug it off and not make a big deal, hoping she'd realize how weird it is to bring up my income in these casual conversations. But now, looking back after what happened at the restaurant, I wonder if I should have been more direct. Maybe if I'd said something back then, we wouldn't be here now. Update 2. After all of this went down, I thought maybe my sister would cool off, realize what she'd done, and come to her senses. But no. The next morning, she called me, and the second I answered, I could tell by her tone that she was in no way ready to apologize. Instead of showing even a hint of remorse, she launched into this whole tirade about how I had no right to give the restaurant her information, and how I'd humiliated her by letting them chase her down for the payment. According to her, I'd put her in an impossible position, and she was furious that, because of me, she'd actually have to go back and pay that bill. She went on and on about how I'd embarrassed her, telling me how awful it was for her to receive calls from the restaurant. Apparently, she felt it was completely out of line for me to let them contact her, even though, in reality, she'd walked out on her own bill. She made it sound as though I was the one who'd inconvenienced her, not the other way around. She didn't seem to care at all that she'd left my husband and me in a horrible spot the night before, or that we were forced to handle her mess. She just kept circling back to how rude I was for letting this happen to her, as if I had conspired to put her through some big ordeal. But here's the kicker, she actually tried to shift the blame entirely onto me. She said that if I hadn't made her think I was going to pay for her dinner, she wouldn't have had to go through all this unnecessary stress. It blew my mind that she could be this oblivious to her own actions. According to her twisted logic, the entire thing was my fault because I should have known that she'd expect me to cover the bill. She said that because I'd paid for her in the past for smaller, casual meals, I'd somehow set the expectation that I'd be footing the bill this time as well. And then she actually had the nerve to say that if I wasn't planning on covering both of our tabs, I should have clearly stated that upfront, as if it was my responsibility to outline that we'd be paying separately for our meals. I sat there, listening to her try to paint herself as the victim in all of this, absolutely stunned. She was acting as though it was somehow my job to babysit her finances, to anticipate her assumptions, and to warn her about what she'd be expected to pay. Not once did she acknowledge that she'd chosen the restaurant, that I'd offered to go somewhere else, or that she'd literally ordered the most expensive dishes without any regard for the cost. She just kept harping on the idea that I should have been more upfront about not covering her portion. To say I was dumbfounded would be an understatement. I mean, the audacity to completely rewrite the situation in her head to make herself look blameless was just astonishing. Her refusal to take any accountability was almost surreal, and it was so far removed from reality that I actually found myself laughing. It was like I was listening to some elaborate, twisted story that had nothing to do with what actually happened. She was so dead set on not owning up to anything that she'd convinced herself this was somehow all on me, as if I'd plotted the entire evening just to trap her into paying her own bill. In that moment, I just couldn't believe the person I was hearing on the other end of the phone. This was my sister, the same person I'd grown up with, the person I'd looked out for, and here she was, acting as though she was entitled to my money simply because I had it. She kept pushing the narrative that I should have made it clear that she was expected to pay her way, as though going to a restaurant means one person is automatically responsible for the entire bill unless otherwise stated. The fact that she didn't see how unreasonable this was left me speechless. It was as if she was so wrapped up in her entitlement that she'd forgotten basic social norms. She kept saying how unfair it was that she had to spend all this extra money because of me. She seemed completely oblivious to the fact that it was her order, her choices, and her actions that led to that bill in the first place. The idea that I would be responsible for her portion of the check simply because I'd paid for her in the past on smaller occasions felt absurd. I mean, we're not talking about a $20 lunch here. This was a high-end meal at a place I'd only go to once or twice a year with my husband as a treat. The fact that she felt entitled to it simply because I was there was honestly a shock to the system. Hearing her list all the reasons why I was supposedly in the wrong left me feeling drained. The more she spoke, the more I felt like I was listening to a stranger. She just wouldn't accept that she'd been out of line or that she was the one responsible for her actions. She acted as though paying for her own meal was some enormous injustice I'd inflicted upon her, as though she deserved to dine out on my dime just because we shared blood. It was like she genuinely believed that the money I'd worked hard for was somehow also hers to use whenever she felt like it. The entitlement was staggering, and it hurt more than I can say. The entire conversation left me feeling completely disillusioned with her. It wasn't just the fact that she ditched me with the bill the night before, it was the way she twisted everything around, her lack of any sense of responsibility, and her sheer audacity to blame me for her actions. It felt like I was seeing her in a whole new light, and not in a good way. After hanging up, I was left with this bitter realization that, to her, I might just be a piggy bank. And that stung more than I can even express. Since that call, I've been rethinking our relationship, wondering how I never saw this side of her before. It's not about the money. It's about how easily she discarded the bond we've had, how she dismissed our relationship by reducing me to nothing more than a source of cash.